Good evening and welcome to Sex Addiction in the News. My name is Stacy Sprout and I am a licensed therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and author of my own journey called Naked in Public, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other temporary insanities. And welcome to the show. This show was created to educate about sex addiction, and that includes partners who have been affected by someone else's sex addiction, couples, families, and whole communities. And I am passionate about public education about this topic because I want to destigmatize the conversation so people can get help now. So thanks for being here with me. I see some people have joined and we're just delighted to have you. And who we are tonight is my special guest, Dr. Sheri Keffer. And Dr. Sheri Keffer has written a book that I am so excited to tell you more about, and she'll tell you about it too. And she is a partner expert, and she is really, my experience of her is that she is transforming our field right now. And so I'll, without further ado, let her introduce herself a little bit more. Dr. Keffer, Sheri, tell us about you.
Yeah, well, it's so great to be here with you, Stacy, and with all your followers and listeners. And I love what you're doing to help bring truth out and bring education out. Knowledge is power. And when we know what we need to do to heal, we have choice. Then we have a roadmap for where to go. And that's actually why I wrote my book. It's hard. I hate to say that I've become a partner expert because I am one, but I am one. And I think at one level, out of my own story of pain, I'm able to bring that piece forward. And then part of what I did was go back to school. That's part of my do-over stage. I learned and studied and wanted to understand what didn't work and what hadn't happened. And so I've been in the field 20 years. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I'm also a certified sex addiction therapist. And my husband and I work together in Newport Beach. He's also a certified sex addiction therapist. And I'm also a partner trauma specialist. So certified in knowing how to look through the lens of impact and what's happened to partners. But I think there's so many layers to this, Stacy. It's not just one thing. And so I'm looking forward to our dialogue so that we can kind of bring some of those layers forward and really demystify what's going on and bring it into very simple, practical steps in what they need to do, what you need to do to heal from the betrayal that's happened to you.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to do a quick sound check for Facebook. I wonder if somebody who's watching right now, I'm seeing some little hearts go across the screen. You probably can't see those, Sheri, but can you hear us okay? And especially, can you hear what Sheri is saying? She's got a lot of great things to share tonight. Anybody can type in, can you hear okay? I just want to be sure our sound is good. Okay, I think we're okay. I can always do some fiddling with it when we post the video on YouTube, so we'll proceed. So I'll tell you about my experience of the book. So there are a fair amount of resources that are coming out in book-wise, not as many as we need. Oh, good. Okay, someone said they can hear us very well, so thank you for that feedback. But it's sometimes hard to keep up with books like, oh, there's this one and there's that one, and this one caught my eye. It was just released and it's got a great cover and I like the title and I thought, okay, I want to, you had announced it and I was curious about it. And so the book is called Intimate Deception. There's one behind me that you have, and I've got one here. And as I was mentioning when we were talking, I basically devoured this book. I picked it up and I read it, and I don't, I think this topic is scary for people. Picking up a book about intimate deception, the idea that you might go through that book quickly is pretty surprising. We're getting some greetings and hello on Facebook, so I just want to say hello, everybody. I'm so grateful you're here. But you have such an incredibly warm tone as an author. That was my word for you, was warmth. When I read this book, I thought, this is like, and it's so cool that you're sitting there and you have this lamp next to you, because reading this book is like sitting down with Sheri, and she's got the lamp there and she starts talking with you and she tells you her story. And that, I believe, is how we are going to beat this thing, is through story, and a combination of story and really clear tools, as you're going to share with us about what works. So I can't recommend this book enough. And I just feel that the gentleness that you approach partners with, the love and the care and compassion, shines through on every single page. So I do want to say thank you for writing this book, and all the partners I know have already been helped and will continue to be helped by this.
Thanks, Stacey. Well, it's funny that you read it. I was at a conference recently, and a woman came up to buy the book, and she looked kind of scared and bought it quickly and then left, and came back the next day with sunglasses on and had been crying through the night. She said, Sheri, I couldn't put it down. I read it through the night. And she said, I have just found out 6 months ago that my husband has been sexually attracted to men. We've been married 25 years, and I didn't know any of this was going on. And so she just said there were so many things that made me feel like I was at home, and you explained things that have felt so crazy to me in these last 6 months. And so I'm glad that was your experience. And really, it's about, my hope was to break it down in such simple steps, because really, when we're impacted by trauma, our brain goes to mush.
That's right.
That is the truth. And I didn't want to bring something that was technical and was hard to read. And yet I wanted to bring what was technical, because I wanted them to understand trauma. I want to understand shame. I want to understand full disclosures. I wanted y'all to have it all, everything forward, but just in a package that would flow and that you can read when you're impacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I appreciate your acknowledging how the brain is shocked by trauma, and how especially the right brain kind of can really be flooded with feelings, and then our left brain processing is one way to look at it, doesn't really make sense of what's going on very well. And that was one motivator for me to publish my memoir, was I wanted to tell the story, because when people can get into a story and start to move toward the idea of happy endings, or at least healing and progress, I think it can bring them out of that frozen place and into like, okay, yeah, as you're saying, maybe there's hope. And I found a lot of hope in your book. And one thing I wanted to ask you about is, in my work, I work as a therapist with a lot of times with couples who are in recovery. And so I get to see the couples who are both working really hard and who grow, change, and transform and heal. And so I don't have as much experience working with just the partner when their partner, in my case, usually the husband, but sometimes it's the female sex and love addict, is not in recovery. And so that was something that really stood out to me about your book and your story, is that there is a whole massive population out there of partners whose spouses or significant others are not getting into recovery, and they may have so tell me about, you said in your book 76% of women, and you're referring to female partners in your book because they're much more common than male partners, who are betrayed, experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, at clinical levels. What do you see, and which women seem to heal faster from these painful symptoms?
So, Stacey, that was an interesting thing, a phenomenon. I was really trying to understand what looking at in light of reactivity and what symptoms we were looking at. And so there's been different schools of thought out there. Is this trauma only, or is there family of origin issues? Really, what is it? And so I did some research, and I did a study with 100 women. And the cool thing is my study has actually spurred on 2 other studies right now, which I'm happy about, because I think if we don't know what we're looking at, we don't even know what to call it. But once we can begin to look at what it is, then we know how to treat it better. But I was shocked to find out that out of 100 women, 76, 3 out of 4 of them showed clinical symptoms of PTSD. And then the other thing that I gave was a survey looking at family of origin issues. So I happen to be what I call trauma squared. I'm a person, I have trauma in my family of origin, and I have trauma from the betrayal, from the sexual betrayal. And so that can be kind of sticky and confusing and messy to sort out. And so one of the questions I asked a number of questions and gave something called an ACE. It's an adverse, it's called the Adverse Childhood Experience Scale. But it gives us an idea of, out of those 100 women, how many of them had wounds in their early childhood. And I also gave them the TIPSA, which is a trauma inventory for partners of sex addicts, and something called a PCL-5, which is the scale that they use to see PTSD. Well, interestingly enough, 79% of the women, so almost 80%, had family of origin issues. 20% had zero wounds in their family of origin. So what that said to me, but both of these women showed clinical symptoms of PTSD. So whether you've come from a situation, family of origin, where there's been wounds, or whether you've come from a good family, being in a relationship with someone where there's non-consenting sexual acting out. Now, non-consenting means you don't know about it. They didn't tell you they were going to go look at porn. They didn't tell you they were going to get on the line and be involved with cyber sex. They didn't tell you that they were going to have an affair or meet up with somebody on Craigslist or whatever. You did not know. You were not consenting to that sex act. It creates PTSD in us. It's real. And so what does it take to heal? I think part of the healing comes by understanding the layers of trauma, the layers of impact, and then which are community trauma, financial trauma, deception trauma. That was a term that I created, which talks about intimate deception, betrayal trauma. And get this, Stacy. So part of the survey, I asked the women, I said, okay, now why both of these things are horribly painful, okay? We're not denying that either one of these are painfully grievous to us. Which one is more painful to you? Is it the knowledge of the sex acts that person has done, non-consenting, that have harmed you? Or is it the continued patterns of lies that happen once you've discovered, once the sex acts are found out? And do you know what I found out? 65% of them said it's the continued patterns of lies. It's that lying and deceit. So there's this phrase that we use often in recovery circles that says, addicts lie, they lie a lot. But I think that is, we've never realized how harmful it is, because behind every person who's struggling with compulsive sexual acting out, there is a person that's wounded on the other side. So we have to take it seriously, and we have to look at how to help these partners heal from the betrayal trauma.
Thank you. That validates my experience in talking with partners where they say it's the lying that really does the damage, especially the continued lying. So yeah, it's neat to have some actual statistics to back that up and to be able to educate from that place of, wow, yeah, you're not wrong, or there's, it's not out of proportion, that is the thing. It's, to me, I guess I think of the heartbreak, just that, but I appreciate also the expanse of your book goes beyond sex addiction. You're talking about non-consenting intimate deception, sexual acting out. So someone who may have had one affair is
Absolutely.
Creating this kind of the intimate deception and betrayal that you're talking about. So yeah, I like how inclusive you are. Well, you mentioned something about the model, what is it? Is it trauma, codependency model? What does your research talk about the difference? Or how is what you're finding, I guess, inform the difference or the similarities in those models? So I know that's pretty hot topic in our field these days.
Well, and you know what? I'm kind of glad that it is a hot topic, because I don't think we can really grow and change and evolve and heal if we're not able to wrestle with these models that we've had for a long time. And these have been historical models, and many of them have come out of the alcoholic model. Mm-hmm. So I actually looked at a study that was done by three doctors, Doctors Corley, Schneider, and Hook. Mm-hmm. And these were folks that studied what people, the labels, right? How the women or men look at these labels of codependents, co-addicts, and if they related to it or not. And what their study showed is that 41% of the folks that they talked about said that the codependent and co-addict models made sense. They also found that 40% of them said they didn't relate to those terms at all. And then 18% said they related some. So do you see, even in that study, there was conflict. And so I thought, you know what? I need to do my own work. And so let me bring you my thought and I would even say it's a bias, and I'm okay to hold that. And I welcome anybody to spar with me, because let's figure this out, right? When I think about my own recovery, because I'm trauma squared, I came from a family of origin, and I talk about this in my book. There's two kinds of wounds. There's the wounds of commission, and those are acts that are committed against us. So that would be the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, things that clearly are acts that no one should ever have to go through. Then there's the wounds of omission. Now, the wounds of omission sometimes get missed, almost like gas in a room. Like if you had a gas stove and you left the gas on, mm-hmm. you wouldn't see why you were going to die, but you'd still die. And sometimes these wounds of omission over time can be even as or more harmful than the wounds of commission. And I'm not trying to say which trauma is better or worse. It's all bad. Yeah. But wounds of omission are what you didn't get, mm-hmm. but you desperately need mm-hmm. to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, to be acknowledged, to be delighted in. And so if we think about some of those that are struggling with sex addiction or sex, love, and relationship addiction, so many come out of this place of, I just want to be seen. I want to find someone who knows me and loves me and can choose me, but I'm so afraid that I'm going to be rejected. There are these core beliefs and core, I call them trauma-induced shame beliefs that are underneath that. So when I think about codependency, and I think about co-addiction, and I think about addiction for that matter, I see it from the lens of, underneath that are trauma. It's trauma from our family of origins. And trauma, if you want to break that down, trauma is the shame beliefs that get stuck to us like Velcro. When we have something happen to us, whether it's betrayal or in family of origin where we weren't seen or heard, the negative belief might sound something like this. The shame sticks to us. Might sound like, I'm not enough. I'm bad. I'm terrible. I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not in control. I can't trust anyone. I'm powerless. I'm helpless. Those are some of the underlying shame beliefs. So in my book, Stacey, you've probably seen I had an iceberg, a picture of an iceberg, where at the tip of the iceberg are the behaviors that we typically see. So they might be the controlling behaviors, or trying to please other people, workaholism. What is it? The sexual acting out, looking for love in all the wrong places. Whatever those behaviors are, those, if you drill it down another layer of the iceberg, what are the shame-induced beliefs that cause us to behave that way? So I have this little saying that I tell people, and I see it in my own life, my behavior is telling on me, and our behavior tells on us. And if I could help people find out what trauma-induced shame beliefs are driving their behaviors, It's our hidden heart. It drives the behaviors that we do. If I can help people heal those, I think we can really get somewhere. Because sometimes I think in the recovery world, we might say I'm codependent or I'm a co-addict, but what does that mean? It's a label, but how do I heal from that? And so everybody has a different cluster of beliefs that make them behave the way that they do. And that's what I want to help unveil through this book is, what is it that you believe about yourself? What are the negative beliefs that have come from the betrayal trauma? And are you a part of the 80% like me that have wounds of omission and wounds of commission from your family of origin? Or are you part of the 20% that are also experiencing PTSD symptoms and you're experiencing betrayal trauma-induced beliefs? Well, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not enough. I don't trust anyone. And either camp, you're going to be reacting in a certain way. And that's what we want to help people heal from.
Thank you. That is fantastic. I have so many thoughts. I think if you go lower in the iceberg, there's more similarities than differences, I think, in addicts and partners with some of those early stories of the trauma-induced shame beliefs. Including, I would say, I see where you have someone who doesn't necessarily look like they have big trauma in their family, but their sexual education and empowerment was completely neglected. So in comes pornography, and it starts sticking all the shame beliefs to their sexuality that way. So there's many ways that can get in there in terms of sex and what's okay and what isn't sexually, and then we see the effects rippling out.
Well, Stacey, and you know this too, as much as I know, when we are listening to not only our own stories, but stories of those that we're caring for, how many folks do you know that struggle with sex addiction or love addiction or whatever it is, codependency, have had wounds before 10?
Yeah.
Many of us, kids find porn, and even today, it's so important to protect our homes and devices, because an 8-year-old with some fully nude bodies, that is going to actually kind of awaken their brain to dopamine, adrenaline, and oxytocin, which oxytocin is the brain chemical that is secreted when we're nursing our babies. So if you think about our kids being susceptible to these 3 chemicals alone, based on what that image is doing, it's a setup for a path of having unhealthy views of sexuality instead of being able to grow into a view of healthy sexuality. Sex is meant to be beautiful and healthy and connecting. And if that's the first way I've found it, and it seems to make me feel, kids would say it makes me feel icky or wrong, or, already shame is being attached to it. So,
Yep. And so you have a sentence in your book called, and we're sort of doing it with the conversation now, looking what's underneath there. And you say, dig into our roots. And I love that sentence. And I also love the sentence, I was loved, but I wasn't known. Because, there's almost that gray area where you have some kids, or when we were kids, we had the real obvious trauma squared, and then some that maybe we're in this gray area where there's nothing really obvious, but it's the omission trauma or the neglect trauma that I hear you naming. And then some that, no, they didn't have that. And they, for a partner, they just fell in love with someone who was not able to be faithful to them. Yeah. And so, or got bonded to someone who couldn't be faithful and deceived them. And
they, kind of like my story, Stacey, I knew one piece of information. I talk about that in my story. So Connor had come to me to tell me, and this is when we were dating.
This is your ex-husband?
My ex-husband, Connor. Mm-hmm. He told me that he had called a 900 line. Mm-hmm. Well, back in the day, it was either Playboys or 900 lines, and or strip clubs and all of that. But it was one of the ways that you could sexually act out. I didn't know what it was. I was naive, and And so I talked to his brother about it. That's how I met him, was through his brother. And I went to his brother and said, hey, can you tell me, what is this? And he looked around my college campus with me and he said, hey, Sheri, he said, every guy on this college campus, I'm sure, has called a 900 number at some point. And because I trusted him, I knew him, I decided to forgive Connor. And basically, that was it. I didn't look back. I didn't know at that point that I could even ask questions. I had no blueprint for knowing where to go from that. And I didn't even know the questions to ask. I didn't even think it was my right to ask a question, because I grew up in a family of origin where my voice, I wasn't seen or heard. And as part of the trauma, there were other stuff, but I didn't know that it was okay to ask for what I needed. And I just didn't feel like I was worth it. And so those wounds of my past influenced how I dealt with my trauma with Connor. And it wasn't until years down the road, he continued to sexually act out. And because I think it was really betrayal blindness. There's a woman, Dr. Jennifer Freyd, who wrote a book on betrayal blindness. And I love the tagline. It says, while we're fooling ourselves, we're not being fooled. I think for me, I went into a period of denial, a season of denial, because for me to approach it, because my former husband was a pastor. So for me to have brought that out, most likely would have meant us losing our job. And we actually did. We eventually did lose the job. So my whole world fell apart. But it's important that we take a look at what those shame beliefs do, and in light of how they disempower us to move through this process.
Thanks for sharing that part of your story. And I agree with you how important that is. And I think it's poignant because I think of, you are doing awesome. You have this global reach with your book, and you're teaching and educating, got your radio show, and you're wildly successful and also connected to the heart. And so you are a wonderful role model for people, and women especially, who might be in that position where they are not only dealing with the intimate betrayal, and the word I would use for your younger self is innocent, because,
I love that, Stacey. That feels really true. There was an innocence.
Yeah, and I want people to get to have that, and yet at the same time, this culture, things are normalized that are betrayals, and that is normalized, and I just feel outraged about that, and yet, what do we do about that? So we're trying to educate, and so, but I think that the thing I wanted to name in your story that I think strikes a chord for many who will be watching this is, if I let myself know, what if it's not only my heart that's going to break? What if it's, how do I eat? What am I going to do for money? If they were, especially in a role, often women are caring for the children, and that is the empowered energy they're bringing into the family, and then they're reliant on the spouse who is doing the betraying for the financial. Suddenly they're, it's even that much harder to let yourself see it, because there's so much loss and fear, financial, and for the kids. And so I just want to acknowledge how far you have come getting yourself out of that situation, and that I've seen other women who do that, and it's a painstaking journey, and they do it, and they can, who knows where they get to go and how their life journey, can lead them into far better places, if they can stay the course of trying to find that healing and truth.
You're taking me back. It's so interesting, just talking about the finances. So recently I was talking with a woman, heartbreaking story, where she's got, I think, 5 kiddos at home, big family, and her husband is actually in an affair right now. And he told her that I don't know who I want to be with. I'm really confused. I'm stuck between, being with you and being with this other woman. And she had been in a recovery group for almost a year. And I looked at her and I just asked a very simple question. I said, what does it feel like to know that your husband is sexually acting out with another woman on an ongoing basis? And bless her heart, what she did was begin to tell me about his choices and kind of what he was doing. And I kindly and gently redirected her. I said, really what I want to hear is your heart. And these big pools of tears came running down her cheeks. And she just said, I've got 5 kids. There's nothing I can do. Now, that belief, I totally get it. The negative belief is I'm powerless, I'm helpless, I can't do anything. And there's almost like a learned helplessness. There's a part of her that has collapsed into allowing this to happen because she just doesn't know how to get out. And I think it's really important that we do whatever it takes to not stay in that position, because allowing that to happen is going to influence the kids, right? It's influencing her. It ends up, you probably read my chapters on the bodyguard where it impacts our body. I actually went into clinical depression because 4 years I kept the secret. I didn't say a word, and we just continued to move in this church environment and be in leadership. I was living this lie, and it started eating away at me. It started eating away at my soul. And I just don't want that to happen to anybody else if it doesn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the chapter on the bodyguard and how the body, you said something earlier, my behavior is telling on me. And I think that about our somatic body. Sometimes it's like my body's telling on me, like things are not okay.
Yeah, it's the most honest part of us sometimes. It's that light on the dashboard that says, hey, you need some help.
Help.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm really moved by that story. And I feel like in some ways that gentle, that's what came through in your book, kind of a gentle drawing back into the heart of the woman who has been betrayed and saying, I want to know about you. I want to hear about you. And in my quest to promote sex addiction in the news, even the title's focused on sex addiction, but it's on kind of the chaos of sex addiction and how people get better from that, whatever their relationship to that disease is. I had the hardest time finding news about partners, and every week I would struggle. And I, of course, understand that part of that is because the nature of the shame and privacy, people wanting privacy for what they were going through, of course. But I grieve because I feel there's so much suffering in silence, like the woman that you're talking about, where even the, what's reflected back in the public is all about the sex addict, as opposed to, what's it like to be a partner and to be thinking about those choices and to be resourcing, getting support. And so one resource that you and I can help create right now is, and I get this question some, and I actually wrote a little appendix in my book. I think it was called, I wish I had it, What to Do If Your Boyfriend Tells You He's a Sex Addict. And it was kind of like this immediate, like, do this, and this. And my question for you is, how can someone who is dating avoid picking, I guess I'll say sex addict because it's the focus of the show. You could expand it and say, someone who might betray. But where this question comes from, so I was already trained as a certified sex addiction therapist when I was dating. This was, 10 years ago or however long it was, before I met my husband and all that now. But when I was still dating and I met someone, and I remember thinking, oh, I hope I don't pick another sex addict who's not in recovery. And I thought, well, I'm just going to go with the flow and, see how it goes. And I'm not going to try to put my assessment cap on. I'm not at work, I'm dating. And boy, was that a mistake. Because I sure enough picked someone who probably, I don't know if he's a sex addict or not. I didn't assess him for that, but he certainly betrayed me and was having a relationship at the same time and not telling me. And I was the second woman, not the first, and it was just very painful. And and then I talked to another beloved colleague woman, so knowledgeable and esteemed, and she said, I also picked an active sex addict. And I know a third woman who had read my book, and she's like, same here. And so our training as certified sex addiction therapists doesn't necessarily protect us in our personal lives, unless we let it, unless we really work hard. But sometimes even these women who are experts in treating sex addiction can be deceived. So I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I love it. You're in my inbox. Sometimes I'll say you're in my inbox. Like you took me back to so many moments in my life. But let me start with this. So recently I had a 21-year-old read my book, and she called me and she said, okay, I'm kind of scared now that I read this book, because on my college campus, she goes, I don't even think there's one guy who's not addicted to porn. And she said, my heart is kind of distraught because I would like to get married someday, but I don't even know how to get safe. And so I said, well, you know what? I said, this is the deal. I said, I want you to look at this book as a gift, because I want you to know knowledge is power, and I want you to know everything you need to know about it so that you do your best not to choose it. But I said, the part of what I want you to do is, I said, when you go out on a date, and this is part of how I had to re-date over time, because remember the shame beliefs I talked about? I had two of them. I called them the deadly duo. I had two big pieces of Velcro on me. One of them was I can't trust anyone, and one of them was I can't trust my judgment. So try dating with those. I had a lot of guys try to win my heart, but there was no wall they could climb that was short enough for them to get over, because I had that as a defense to keep people away. That's what shame does. Our brain's the most selfish organ in the body, and it puts shame on us so that it isolates us and keeps us from that ever happening again. Well, then you don't stay in a relationship. And so I was jacked up for 17 years. I wandered out there and tried to get back on the dating scene for 17 years. I kept choosing people that I felt there was this dynamic, an unhealthiness. And so that's when I had to do some of my own trauma work. But in the midst of that, as I would go out, usually by date 2, maybe 3, I'm telling them my story, because usually after date 2 or 3, you're starting to go, well, I think I might want to get to know him a little bit better. So after they hear my story, then maybe it's the next date, or it could be that night. I basically ask them, I use my voice. I'm empowered at this point. And I say, you know what, in light of where I've been, can you share with me if pornography or sexual acting out, if that's something that you struggle with? And if so, when is the last time you've sexually acted out? Now, I just sat there and kindly smiled. My goal was not to judge them. I was really trying to understand where they were coming from. And you know what is really amazing? I had quite a number of men. They were kind of surprised by the question, but I had quite a number of them say, you know what? I do struggle with that. That's something that that I haven't really gotten my arms around yet. And then I had guys who actually said to me, actually, that's not my gig. That's not something that I struggle with. It's not like, I've looked at porn. It's not like I've never seen it, but it's not something that I go back to or have a regular, I don't look at it. It's just not my gig. I'd rather be with someone, a real woman, right? I'd rather have that kind of experience. And then I had guys that didn't really say a whole lot, but guess what? They didn't call me back. And truly, I just said, and I kind of just said in a light way, I just said, well, if it is something that you struggle with, I'm not the person you want to be with, because I know too much, and I'm not going to be a good partner for you. Now, do you see how vulnerable I am? I'm being honest. I'm not judging them. I'm bringing my my wound forward, and I'm letting, I'm giving them a choice as well. And when they didn't call me, I was relieved, actually. I was like, good vetting. That's what I want to do, vet well. Because I didn't want to live it again. Stacey, it cost me 2 decades of my life, and I wasn't about ready to go down that road again, unless I had to. But it meant I had to be brave and ask the questions and not be living out of fear, not be a victim. I am a victim of what happened to me. But one thing you'll probably notice in my book, Stacey, is I am all about helping us get out of that victim position and get on a track of strength and responsibility. How do I help women who've been impacted get empowered so they can walk through this and heal well? Not like heal like a broken bone that, is, like a bone that's healed broken. I want to help people heal well. Straight and strong.
Well, thank you. I appreciate hearing that story about your dating, and it's bringing me back also, because after I had that experience with feeling betrayed and processing my feelings about it, I did learn when I was dating to bring up pornography and just talk about values. What are your thoughts about that? What's your experience with pornography? What does it mean for you today? And I had brought it up with that man that I had been dating, and he had, just no big deal. But when I talked about what I did for a living as a sex addiction therapist, he started giggling kind of maniacally. And I look back and I go, that could have been a clue. But sometimes we don't know. I guess I just want to acknowledge that too. Like sometimes even with careful vetting, even the most brilliant people can be deceived if someone is really intent on doing so. And so that,
I agree with you. And I think I tell women, I say, you know what, part of how you're going to get through this is learning how to ask questions. And it's okay to ask questions. And when you ask your husband, you can just say, I'd like to ask you a question. This is in my book. I talk about something called an intentional ask, how you do that and how you do it in a way that they're going to hear it. But when you ask him, when's the last time you've sexually acted out or looked at anything, pornography or anything, it's going to do 2 things. It's going to create an opportunity for him to bring you truth, or it's going to force a lie. So either way, going forward, you're going to eventually find out, is my guy one of those that is serious about his recovery? And I talk about that in the chapter, how we can help you heal. There's 3 types of guys, right? 3 types of men or women that are struggling with sexual acting out. There are those who get it and are really trying to get recovery and sobriety, right? There are those who don't get it and they're in denial. And those folks really need to be woken up. Those are the ones that are denying what they're doing. They're justifying it. They're minimizing it. They're blaming you, blaming other things. They're defending what they're doing. And then there's a third type, and I think this is the type you're talking about also, is the third type knows what they're doing, but they don't want to make the change. And they want to continue to sexually act out, but to keep their world and image intact. And I think you probably feel the same kind of vindication in this whole Me Too movement, when there have been people asked to step down from these positions of influence, whether they're radio, TV casters or people in positions. There's a consequence to their actions, and that does feel good to know that those that are trying to maintain that, somebody's coming alongside and saying, no, there's a consequence to that. But those are the 3 different types of people, and really it's important when you see the one you're with, your husband or boyfriend, and over time you're going to get to understand through how he's behaving. I say trust his behavior, not his words, right? When he's in recovery, I want you to look at what he's doing, not listen to what he's saying. And then you're going to find out which one of those 3 categories he's in.
Yeah. I encourage people to read that part of your book because it is very empowering. about the discernment. And I know what I eventually did is I decided I was only going to date men in recovery because I knew I would end up with a sex addict. I just always did. So I figured I'd find one who already knew he was and was far along in his recovery and really fierce about his sobriety. And so that's what I did. But
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's great. Now I hear that and I go, wow. I see that is a very brave move.
Yeah. Well, it was a solution at the time. And because I get to work with men in recovery, I get to see the unfolding of these powerful characters. And if I see the work, I say, don't quit before the miracle, because you have got a diamond in the rough. And, if they stay the course, so just like you're saying, look at the behavior, look at the program work, and eventually you see how you feel, make sure you're feeling safe. But there's tons of potential there. And if the stats are true, what they're showing us about the addiction to pornography levels, then I think women are going to have to consider finding someone who's on the other side of a problem, as opposed to never finding anyone who's ever had a problem.
I think we're going to see it being more and more common, which is heartbreaking. But what you're saying is true as somebody who's actually said, I don't want this in my life because it doesn't really serve me well. And I need to figure it out. I got a single guy I'm working with right now where I'm looking at him as that diamond in the rough as I work with him as his therapist. And we're really sorting out the trauma. I'm doing EMDR with him. When he sexually acts out, we unpackage it and look at what was the trigger that came before you did that. I mean, that's like what it feels like to work with someone who's really cares about healing the wound underneath the behavior that he's caught up into. And it's so cool when you see, I love your phrase about the diamond in the rough, this person begin to heal and come out of that. I want to tell one little story. So there was a couple, I call her Queen Leanne, Bob and Queen Leanne, and she and her husband went into treatment. And I love that you work with couples, Stacey, because it's being on the front line of that, it's so complex. There's so much pain and it can be complicated. But she went to a workshop that I taught. And after the workshop, she felt some hope in her heart. And so she went and bought a castle, a Lego castle, and told her husband that for every day of sobriety, he would get a Lego. And she was going to build that castle. And it took him 3 years to get to a point where he was at a place of stability. And it was so funny because Patrick Carnes talks about that. It takes generally 3 to 5 years to establish that sobriety that feels like, okay, I'm more ahead of this than I am behind. But I think it was 985, it's in my book, so many Legos. When she finished it, she went and bought the Queen and gave him the Queen. Aww. And so, great story about her and what she did to help her. And they had it in the bedroom, in a side bedroom, and it was the same bedroom that he had to sleep in when they were going through this. And she's like, I can't have you in the bed with me. And so he went into the spare bedroom, but that's where they built the castle. And I love them. I sat with them in that spare bedroom, and they had changed so much in those 3 years. And he was now connected with men, and he's found his heart. He learned how to bring words and talk about things. And the whole time, Stacey, it was amazing. I was just interviewing them, and he kept looking at her. His eyes were engaged with her. And I asked her, I stopped, and I said, Leanne, I said, has Bob looked at you that way before? Did he used to look at you this way? And she said, no, he never used to look at me that way. This has come out of our journey of pain. We are so much more connected now than we were before. And that, you talked about that earlier, Stacey, that's some of that post-traumatic growth. That's what it looks like to get to the other side of this. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of work in between, right?
Yes.
But do it, whether you're a single person like me that came out the other side, or whether you're married. You and I both are witnesses to people who have done the work and done what's needed to heal.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that story. You wrote that story in your book, and I loved it when I read it, and I love it even more hearing you share it, because I can see the Legos getting built day by day, you know, and just how powerful what a rebuilding, like literal. And to me, that's such a great. Speaking of the literal brain and the storied brain, like what a wonderful whole-brained witnessing and ritual to honor the sobriety, the progress in their marriage. And then, I mean, the what I love about that is he won the queen back. I mean, there's a certain just fairy tale that came true for them.
Yeah, he gave it to him too. I mean, he wasn't demanding the queen.
No.
But he got encouraged. I mean, every day he was able to see another Lego put on there. It kind of made his recovery or made his work worth something, you know. And I think a lot of these guys, if they're serious about their recovery, what happens for partners oftentimes, Stacy, is we get stuck in our trauma wounds. Like I told you, my deadly duo, I can't trust anyone and I can't trust my judgment. Or one of my other ones was I'm not in control. And so sometimes as partners, we can behave in ways that reflect our negative beliefs. So if I'm controlling because I have a negative belief that I'm not in control. So that's why I'm trying to control the situation. If I'm not trusting over time, I mean, if he's been working in sobriety and he's 2 years in, or, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years, if I'm still having a hard time trusting him, well, has he been doing the things that have been trustworthy? And if he has, then I need to also do my work. I need to go back in and go, wow, that negative belief has jacked me up and I'm having a hard time. The opposite of that, I can't trust anyone, is I can choose whom to trust. And sometimes getting there through EMDR or some way that we can thoughtfully and emotionally get back in and touch that wound and then help to move ourselves forward is what we need to do as partners so that we can actually do the repair work. And we don't get stuck, stuck not moving forward.
Well, and that just that illustration of the belief, it's not, you don't necessarily go from I can't trust anyone to I trust everyone. I mean, there's the middle. Right. Are you coming into that middle? I learn to discern. I learn to ask the questions. I learn to witness how I feel with the answers. And so I'm intrigued by something that you said. This story for Queen Leanne and Bob, and I'm wondering what, so that's for a couple that does the work together. But right. What about the partner where, we'll say her in this situation, her partner does not do the work and she needs to put up boundaries. You've got great piece on boundaries in your book. But I'm even just going more to the ritual for her. I'm like, what could be a ritual for a partner as she continues to step into her independence, even if it means, the marriage has to come apart or the public view, the beautiful couple has to, individuate because of this betrayal. Like what? I mean, I guess I'm just curious about what are things that women do to celebrate their triumph of self, even after they're betrayed. So I think,
great question.
And I didn't give you that question ahead of time. So
no, I love it. It's a good one. I think for women, part of what I see, there's a video out there, and I'm trying to think of her name right now. Out of the Woods, Taylor Swift. I'm sorry, Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Who did Out of the Woods. I often use that video when I'm teaching because it shows the tenacity of a woman and her willingness to fight. And I love it. If you see it, watch it tonight.
I will. I'll click it.
Cry every time I see it.
Oh.
But the reason I love it is because at the very end of that, she says that I lost him, but I found myself. And so whether you don't know where your marriage is going, right? Or whether you've already left that, I think the most important ritual is for you to find yourself and to build a core, a strong core. People always ask me, well, what is a core? What does that mean? And I think it's a woman who knows who she is okay with her imperfections, her brokenness, is not afraid to use her voice and speak truth. And so if there's any ritual, that what came up to my mind is it's Wonder Woman. I have a Alex and Andy bracelet that they have this bracelet out right now. I think it's great, but it, let me show it to you. I think I have it. Oh yeah, I have it. Can I show you guys?
Yes, please.
When I was in recovery. Okay, can you see?
I love it.
Okay,
Warrior.
It says Warrior Princess.
Oh, it's got the W's.
Yeah, Warrior Princess. So I wear that every day. And when I was in my recovery, I went to this small group and over the weekend, because I was wounded, of course, I had someone describe me in two ways. They said, well, you're kind of like a Viking woman. Like, don't touch me. I can handle it. Don't open my door. I had this edge to me. And I did have kind of an angry edge because I had been hurt. Mm-hmm. The other thing, which is so funny, Stacy, that you see my warmth, because I want you to know that is me getting myself back. Mm-hmm. That is my core. It's who I was before all this happened. But I'm telling you something, I did have anger for quite some time. And the other was a scrapper girl. They described me as just somebody who's picking up the breadcrumbs on the floor. Mm-hmm. Now, before everyone gets offended that people are telling me these things, it totally resonated with me. It was like, thank you for describing how you're observing me. Mm-hmm. And so I went on a walk, and there's this author that I like his work. He wrote a book called Wild at Heart. Mm-hmm. And he has this James John Eldredge, and he did this weekend for men. He does this weekend for men, and he tells men to be brave and to ask God who he says they are. And so I thought, well, I just have been told I'm a warrior. I mean, I'm a Viking woman and a scrapper girl. And so I was walking along this dry riverbed, and with all the bravery I can muster, I just remember asking God, well, who am I? Who do you say I am? And then after I asked that, I went like this, like I covered my eyes. I'm like, okay, you guys tell me now. I freaked out. Here I am asking God. And I was so scared that it was like going to hear nothing or hear something. Yes, you are a scrapper or whatever, something negative. But I got to tell you, the weirdest thing happened. It wasn't very much longer, and I didn't hear an audible voice, but let me tell you what I heard in my soul, the deepest part of me. I heard this. I heard the sentence, you are my warrior princess. So what is warrior? It's the opposite of a Viking woman, and what is a princess? It's the opposite of a scrapper girl. So when Alex and Annie came out with these, I bought it. And I went. Because it's who I am. It's my identity. So a ritual for me is, what have I surrounded myself with? I have crowns in my office, a princess crown. My house, I love crowns. My blue butterflies here are something that have significant story about who I am. I have surrounded myself with these little tiny trinkets and treasures that remind me of my identity.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that story and showing us your bracelet. That is a beautiful soul story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that any woman who goes through intimate deception can find or reclaim their soul story, because no one can take that away, even if it can be away from us because of trauma or neglect or betrayal, and that we can find it. And so thanks for sharing how you did that.
Well, Stacey, you've done it too. Your listeners know that, and that's why they keep coming back to you. Because you know what? You kind of know authenticity when you see it. You know someone who's real. And I don't know about you, but some of my favorite people are the people that have gone through a really dark season in their life and have come out a deeper, richer version of themselves. And I talk about in my book, I said I was a dirt farmer for years. I just lived in the shame and kept shoveling shame from one side of the room to the other. And it wasn't until I started addressing some of those lies, those negative beliefs about myself, and I got my truth back, that I could even begin to move through life in a way that was more empowered. So I want that for every one of you that's listening. Stacy and I both want that. We really want you to heal, and my hope was that this book would be a roadmap for how you can turn this around, with or without your partner, with or without your spouse. I want you to be the strongest person eventually that you can be. And it's possible. I'm kind of a billboard for it. You can do it, girl. I did it. I'm just a few steps down the street from you, just a few steps further down the food chain. But and Stacy, you've done that too. And that part of our lives, I think, is what gives so many of us hope.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that hope. Thank you for that affirmation. As one who has betrayed others, I have had to do my own work about how to try to make that right in the world. And I didn't tell you this ahead of time because I wasn't sure I was going to go into it, but this is just a brief thing I'll say. I created a website called malepartnersofFemaleSexAddicts.com.
Oh, wow.
And if you log on to that, it's completely not finished. It's just not finished because I'm in the process of making it. Ultimately, I want to turn it over to Male Partners of Female Sex Addicts to run the site. I'm just seeding it. And I have one male partner who actually is writing his story right now, because there's going to be stories on there, because we don't hear enough from men about their experience of intimate betrayal, especially from women like I used to be. And so, that amends work, like how do we try to do something to make it right? And I think that's part of, for me, how I've, instead of moving the shame from side to side, kind of like start shoveling it out and, polishing things off. And so I wanted to share that with you because of your affirmation. And so sometimes we really do have to get into action. For those of you who are identifying with the betrayer in the scenario, there's living amends where you no longer betray, and sometimes there's symbolic amends. You make direct amends, and then sometimes you have to make amends on a broader scale in some way to try to make the harm that you did to someone else right. So all those things are possible and out there.
Well, what I love about that is it's such a testimony of your step process, of going through the 12 steps. Like, I'm hearing you, and I am so celebrating for how you made your 12 steps real. You didn't just check boxes. You made it a life. You made it a life moving forward. And it's weird. I have a little bit of a loss in it too, because Connor didn't do that. He didn't get into 12 step. I was hearing you, and the flash that went through my head is, what an amazing woman who went through her own process of healing herself from acting out. And now you're doing something to care for those that have been wounded. And I was wishing that he could hear you. Actually, I was wishing that he could actually get what you just said, because it's really how you turn this around. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that about you. And men are even more underserved than women, right? Men, I don't even know if there's one resource out there. I've asked someone's asked me, are you going to write this for men? And I might be interested in talking with them. Maybe you'd want to do it with me. But I really want to have it from a male perspective, because I think there's some things, there's been a number of men that have read my book and I've just said, okay, ignore it, try to just set aside gender, just take what you need and throw away the rest, that have found tremendous help in it. But I think there's some things unique to men who've been betrayed that we still need to learn so much more about. So I love that you're doing that. Good for you.
Well, thank you. I imagine with being out there with your book, you will hear more stories, from men. So if there's if there's a way we can collaborate to try to get those out there too. because we all can relate to betrayal on some level. But I'm so grateful for this book. I'm going to hold it up one more time. And I do think it's important to have resources that are gender-based. There is something, I mean, that's part of my experience of the warmth of this as someone who's been betrayed. It's just, I just felt like you were talking right to me, you know? And I think that women need that. And so we'll keep creating resources for women and men. And so, yay. So, okay, well, it's been about an hour, a little over. So I better wind up. But I want to ask, how can our viewers find more about you? How can they find your book? How can they find you to listen on the radio? Tell us where they can get to you.
Yeah, so my website is braveone.com. So it's BRAVEONE.com. And on there, you'll see the book landing page. It'll take you to a bunch of different places you can buy it. Actually, right now, I got to tell you this, Target just picked up the book.
Oh my gosh, congratulations!
So it's $13.51 at Target. There's no reason not to get a good deal right now. So go to Target and get it. But that was thrilling to me. We've been, I think I'm 80 days in from book launch. And so it's getting out there on the street, which I'm happy. Yeah, and so you can connect with me there if you have more questions or want to know how to connect with people in your area. I can help resource that for you. And then I also have an interesting page that's called God Sightings page. And it's a little bit reflected in chapter 20 of the book, where I've spoken on weekends, and I feel like God has shown up with a message for us as betrayed partners. And so I chronicled those over the years, and I just kept a journal. And the whole story's there. It's more than that we have time to talk about, but check it out. There's some cool things on there, and I want to help you in any way I can. Care about you.
Awesome. And what about your radio show? Can they find?
Yeah, so I'm on 9 years. I've been on the radio program called New Life Live. It's on every day. So find out where it is in your area. I'm in California, so is KKLA in my area, but wherever you live, if you just go to newlife.com, you can find out what the call letters are in your area. And it's an hour of counseling. So there's usually 3 of us that are on, and people call in. Today we did a full show on suicide. That was really so powerful, timely. Especially with what's happened this week. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, it's always fresh, always stuff, and it's free therapy. So check it out.
Wow. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you again for your precious time. And I know you're doing a lot of interviews right now, so thank you for being on my show and being here with us. And
hey, can I say one more thing? I want to mention AppSats and ITAP too. So if you need some resources, AppSats is APSATS, and that is a trauma-focused, betrayal trauma-focused website for partners. And then ITAP, IITAP, .org, I think. It's .com, itap.com. There's folks that are trained in sex addiction and partner trauma. So those are some of the main websites to go to for help.
Thank you. And you've got some resources in your book as well.
Yes, on the end and the back page, there's lots of goodies there for you to point you in the right direction.
Awesome. All right. Well, so thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us and for joining this conversation about betrayal, trauma, and healing, and stories of triumph, really, and amends. So, oops, I didn't introduce Sparky. He's kind of waking up now. Okay. Hello, Sparky. So we'll have to sign off. So let's see. For the show next week, I have a brief conversation. I do not have a special guest. I'm actually going to have a brief show. I'm going to talk about sober, sacred sexuality. And then we'll have other guests, and I'll send out information about that. But for tonight, I will sign off in the way that I do by saying thank you, Dr. Sheri Keffer, for being with us. Thank you for the viewers on Facebook for being live with us. That was really fun. And thanks for the little hearts and flowers and faces that you sent across, and the comments. If you are watching this on YouTube, then please, if you're interested, you can subscribe to the show. You can click the little bell and get notifications about future shows. And just thanks for your support as we try to carry information to the public that's true and helps for the healing. So finally, I will say good night, and may you feel loved. And oh, I'm going to space out on my closing. May you feel loved. May you feel something. Oh, cherished. That's it. And may you love and cherish others. Okay. Good night.